Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Tonight, we examine a photograph that has managed to unsettle viewers for over a century, an image that at first appears to be nothing more than a benign gathering of the faithful, captured in the final moments of the Edwardian era. The photograph in question was taken in the autumn of 1909, outside a small stone church in northeastern Pennsylvania. The congregation stands arranged in 3 neat rows on the church steps, their Sunday best on full display, despite the black and white medium. Men in stiff collars and women in high-necked dresses with elaborate hats, all staring straight ahead with the practiced stillness required by the cameras of the day. At first glance, the image radiates an almost tangible sense of community pride. The church itself is a modest but handsome structure, built in the Gothic Revival style popular during the previous century, with a single bell tower rising prominently from the right side of the facade. The stonework shows the care of dedicated parishioners, and a newly installed stained glass window above the main entrance suggests the congregation was prosperous enough to afford such decorative touches. For decades, the photograph remained unremarkable, a simple document of religious life in early 20th century America. It was passed down through generations, occasionally displayed at church anniversary celebrations, but otherwise gathering dust in parish archives. The photographer, presumably a local professional hired for the occasion, left no special notes about the day. The weather appears crisp and clear, with shadows suggesting mid-morning light slanting across the gathered faithful. But in 1976, when the image was being prepared for the church's centennial celebration, something disturbing was finally noticed in one of the upper windows of the bell tower. There, partially obscured by the reflection of clouds on the glass, a face appears to be watching the congregation. Not the face of a curious parishioner who might have climbed the tower stairs to observe the photography session from above. No, what peers out from that darkened window has been described by those who've studied the image as unmistakably malevolent. The face is gaunt, with hollow eyes and what appears to be an unnaturally wide smile. More disturbing still is the fact that church records confirm the bell tower was kept locked on Sundays, and the room visible through that particular window was only accessible through a single door, for which the pastor held the only key. The pastor that day was Reverend Thomas Hadley, standing prominently in the center of the front row, Bible in hand. Historical records show that Reverend Hadley would, 3 weeks after this photograph was taken, abruptly resign his position, citing personal reasons. He and his family left town before the first snowfall, leaving no forwarding address. What exactly is watching from that tower window? Is it merely a trick of light and shadow, a photographic anomaly created by the primitive equipment of the day? Or did something sinister infiltrate this house of worship, something that only the camera's impartial eye could detect? The congregation's Centennial Committee held varying opinions about what to make of the unsettling face in the window. Some dismissed it entirely, suggesting it was merely pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns. Others whispered that perhaps a transient had somehow gained access to the tower. The photograph was still displayed during the celebration, though positioned in a dimly lit corner where fewer questions might be asked. But Martha Coleman, then 87 and the only living person who had been present when the photograph was taken, became visibly distressed when shown the image again after so many years. "We never spoke of it," she whispered to her granddaughter. "We were told not to speak of it." Further investigation into church records revealed curious inconsistencies. The 3 Sundays preceding the photograph showed unusually high attendance, with Reverend Hadley delivering impassioned sermons on the theme of spiritual warfare. The church treasurer's ledger indicated an unexplained expenditure for protective measures 2 weeks before the photograph was taken. Most telling was a letter discovered in the parish council minutes, written by Hadley himself, requesting permission to conduct what he termed a spiritual cleansing ritual in the bell tower. Permission had been granted. Local newspaper archives from that autumn reported a series of peculiar incidents in the town. 3 children went missing for 2 days, eventually found huddled in a cave in the nearby woods, unable or unwilling to explain their absence. Farm animals were discovered mutilated in ritualistic patterns. Most disturbing was the unexplained fire that destroyed the home of Eliza Winters, a woman who had publicly accused Reverend Hadley of improper conduct during private counseling sessions. Amateur historians tracing Hadley's movements after his abrupt departure found he had traveled west, establishing a new identity in a mining town in Colorado. There, he founded a spiritual society that local newspapers described as unorthodox in practice. The group disbanded after Hadley's death in 1923, a death that coroner's reports listed as self-inflicted under circumstances suggesting extreme mental disturbance. In 1984, when the church underwent renovations, workers accessing the bell tower room discovered peculiar markings carved into the floorboards beneath the worn carpet, concentric circles surrounding an unfamiliar symbol resembling a distorted human face. The workers also reported an oppressive feeling that caused several to refuse to continue working in the space. Photographic experts from the University of Pennsylvania examined the original image in 1992 using then-modern enhancement techniques. Their analysis suggested the face in the window contained features impossible to reconcile with human anatomy, the spacing of the eyes too wide, the jawline extending beyond natural proportions. One technician quit the project after reportedly experiencing vivid nightmares featuring the face. Perhaps most chilling is the fact that 5 of the church members standing in the front row of the photograph died within 6 months of its taking, all from different causes, yet all described by witnesses as suffering from the same symptoms in their final hours: uncontrollable trembling, visions of a dark figure standing at the foot of their beds, and the repeated phrase, "It found a way in." Martha Coleman's reluctant confession spurred a deeper investigation into the months preceding the photograph. Church attendance records, meticulously kept by the parish secretary, revealed that new faces had begun appearing in services starting in early spring of 1909. These visitors, never fewer than 3, never more than 7, always sat in the back pew, signed the guest book with illegible scrawls, and departed before the congregation's customary social hour. Local historian Edward Garfield uncovered correspondence between Reverend Hadley and a professor, Ambrose Thorne, of Miskatonic University. The letters, yellowed and fragile, detailed Hadley's growing concern about unwelcome influences penetrating his congregation. In his final letter, dated just 10 days before the photograph, Hadley wrote, "They come each week more boldly. I fear the protective wards are failing. What entered as whispers now walks among us wearing familiar faces." The bell tower room itself became the focus of renewed interest when the church underwent electrical updates in 2003. Electrician Samuel Weaver discovered a hidden compartment beneath the windowsill containing a small tin box. Inside were 5 daguerreotypes of different individuals, none of whom appeared in church records, and a journal written in a cipher that has defied translation except for one recurring phrase: "The smiling watcher comes when called." Most unsettling was the discovery made by photographic preservationist Rebecca Kraft in 2011. While creating digital archives of the church's historical images, she noticed something previously overlooked. In the original 1909 photograph, 6 children stand in the front row. Yet in every subsequent reproduction of the image, including those made mere weeks after the original, only 5 children appear. The missing child, identified through parish birth records as Timothy Wells, did not die or move away according to any official documentation. His family continued attending services for years afterward, but no further mention of Timothy exists in any record. The Wells family plot in the church cemetery contains no grave for Timothy. However, ground-penetrating radar studies conducted in 2016 revealed an anomaly beneath the bell tower foundation. A small cavity approximately the size of a child's body. Former parishioners recalled a curious tradition that died out in the 1930s. No child was ever allowed to enter the church alone, and the bell tower stairway entrance was painted with a red line that children were forbidden to cross. Acoustic engineers testing the church bell in 2018 reported unusual sound patterns. When rung at specific frequencies, the bell produced secondary tones inaudible to human ears, but clearly visible on spectrographic analysis. These patterns, when mapped, created distinct geometric shapes resembling the markings found beneath the tower room carpet. The original glass plate negative of the photograph was believed lost until 2 months ago, when it surfaced at an estate auction in Colorado, less than 20 miles from where Reverend Hadley had established his spiritual society. The current owner, who wishes to remain anonymous, reports that the negative reveals something even the print cannot clearly show. The face in the window appears to be looking not at the congregation, but directly at the camera itself, as if acknowledging that its presence was being recorded for posterity. Perhaps most disturbing about the photograph is what happened to those who examined it too closely. In 2007, paranormal researcher Diana Keller spent 3 months analyzing the image, using specialized equipment to measure electromagnetic anomalies within the photographic paper itself. Her research notes, recovered after her unexplained disappearance, described cold spots within the emulsion precisely where the face appears in the window. The church's current pastor, Reverend Michael Leahy, granted our team limited access to the parish archives last month. Among the documents was a sealed envelope containing handwritten accounts from 3 children who attended Sunday school in 1909. Their drawings, created during a lesson about guardian angels, depicted nearly identical figures watching from the church tower. Tall, emaciated silhouettes with elongated fingers and crescent-shaped grins. Their teacher had apparently collected these drawings and hidden them away with a note reading, "God help us. They see it clearly while we remain blind." Audio recordings made in the bell tower during multiple investigations capture what sound engineers describe as subvocal whispering that becomes audible only when played at 1/3 speed. The resulting phrases include biblical references interspersed with what linguists identify as pre-Christian incantations in an archaic dialect not consistent with any known European language. The most compelling evidence comes from Eliza Winter's granddaughter, who recently donated her grandmother's journal to the County Historical Society. Entries from early 1909 detail how Reverend Hadley had begun conducting private evening services for select parishioners. According to Winters, these gatherings involved summoning exercises designed to bring forth a divine sentinel that would protect the congregation from unnamed threats. The journal breaks off mid-entry after describing how Hadley claimed something had answered our call, though not what we intended. Photographic analysis reveals another detail overlooked for generations. The stained glass window above the church entrance, newly installed at the time according to church records, contains an unusual geometric pattern around its border. When this pattern is overlaid with the markings found in the bell tower room, they form a perfect match for what occult researchers recognize as a doorway sigil, a symbolic construct believed to thin the boundaries between worlds. Most recently, facial recognition software programmed to trace familial resemblances made a chilling connection. When comparing the face in the window to photographs of congregation members, it identified partial matches with 7 different parishioners, as though the entity had borrowed features from multiple individuals to construct its appearance. The church photograph continues to yield new secrets, even as those who study it too intently report increasing sensations of being watched. 3 separate photographic experts have noted that the face appears to shift position slightly between viewings, though no physical change to the print can be detected. Perhaps most chilling is what happens when viewing the image in complete darkness. Those who have tried report that when all other light is removed, the face in the window becomes the only element still faintly visible on the paper, seemingly generated by its own phosphorescence. Last year, our investigation took an unexpected turn when Sophia Hadley Brooks, great-granddaughter of Reverend Thomas Hadley, contacted our team. Initially hesitant, she eventually shared a weathered wooden box containing her ancestors' personal effects, items she had kept hidden even from her immediate family. Among these possessions was a pocket watch that stopped at precisely 3:47, the exact time the church photograph was taken according to the photographer's log. More telling was a small leather journal with metal clasps, its pages filled with increasingly frantic entries. "The smiling one grows stronger," wrote Hadley in an entry dated 3 days before the photograph. "I believed we were summoning an angelic guardian, but I have been deceived. What comes through wears borrowed flesh, like ill-fitting garments. Yesterday, I witnessed Elder Matthews speaking with his own voice, while simultaneously smiling at me from across the sanctuary." The journal reveals Hadley had secretly corresponded with occult practitioners across New England, seeking methods to close what he called the thinning space. His final entry, written the night before he fled Pennsylvania, contains a hastily sketched diagram of the church with 7 points marked around its perimeter, labeled anchor stones. "God forgive me," he wrote. "I cannot undo what I've done, only contain it. The stones are in place. Should they ever be moved, what lurks in the tower will no longer be bound to its confines." Our team located 6 of these anchor stones, unassuming river rocks carved with nearly imperceptible symbols, placed at precise intervals around the church property. The 7th position, marked in Hadley's diagram beneath the cornerstone, was excavated during church renovations in 1967, according to maintenance records. This coincides with reports of parishioners experiencing auditory hallucinations that year, choir voices practicing when the building was empty, children's laughter echoing from the bell tower at midnight, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor above the sanctuary ceiling. Thermographic imaging of the photograph, conducted under laboratory conditions, revealed another anomaly. While the paper consistently registers at room temperature, the specific area containing the tower window measures 2 degrees colder, creating what technicians described as a thermal void in the image. Local folklore researcher Madeline Chen discovered a pattern of similar phenomena predating the church. The land upon which the church was built had been considered unsuitable for construction by the indigenous population, who marked it in their oral histories as a place where the boundary grows thin when the stars align. Early European settlers recorded unexplained disappearances in the area as far back as 1723. Perhaps most disturbing is what happened during our team's overnight investigation last month. Motion-activated cameras placed throughout the church captured nothing unusual until 3:47 a.m., when every device simultaneously recorded 3 seconds of static, followed by a clear image of parish members, not modern individuals, but distinctly the same people from the 1909 photograph, arranged in identical positions as if attending service. They were all looking up toward the bell tower, with expressions of unmistakable terror. When our investigators reviewed this footage in the morning, they discovered something else. A smiling reflection watching them from the monitor screen itself, visible only when the recording was paused at the final frame. A photograph tells a story beyond its frame. But what happens when the story reaches out toward the viewer? This phenomenon manifested recently when librarian Esther Merrill contacted our team after finding the church photograph abandoned in a returned book on Pennsylvania history at the Arkham Public Library. "Something impossible is happening," she wrote in her trembling email. "The print is changing." Documentation provided by Merrill shows subtle alterations appearing in the photograph over 7 days of observation. The positioning of parishioners remains constant, but their expressions appear increasingly aware, as if coming to the gradual realization that something stands among them. Most notably, 3 subjects in the back row now turn their heads slightly toward the bell tower instead of facing the camera. We arranged for comparative analysis at the Forensic Imaging Laboratory at Miskatonic University. Their report confirmed no physical tampering with the print. The changes appeared to be manifesting within the photographic emulsion itself. More disturbing was their observation that these alterations seemed to accelerate when human attention focused on the image for extended periods. "It responds to being watched," wrote Dr. Eleanor Visser in her analysis, "almost as if our observation completes some kind of circuit." This interactive quality may explain why different observers throughout the decades have reported varying descriptions of the face in the window. It appears the entity doesn't maintain a fixed appearance, but rather adapts to elicit maximum discomfort from each specific viewer. During our investigation, we located Henrietta Wallace, age 98, who attended the church as a child in the 1920s. Though her memory has faded with age, she recalled with startling clarity a rhyme the children would chant while playing in the churchyard. "Smile back at the window, turn away from the door, count to 7, not one more. If it learns your face too well, you'll join the watchers in the bell." Church maintenance records reveal another curiosity. The bell itself was never replaced, despite a large crack discovered in 1934. Instead, parish leaders voted unanimously to leave the damaged bell in place but render it inoperable, filling the crack with a mixture of silver filings, graveyard soil, and what is described only as consecrated matter. The bell has remained silent for almost 90 years. Acoustic engineers noted that the church's architectural design creates an unusual resonance pattern. Sound generated in the sanctuary travels upward and concentrates in the bell tower room, while sounds from the tower are channeled downward with amplified clarity. This creates what they termed an acoustical circuit between the 2 spaces. "The entire building functions as a form of instrument," explained Dr. James Harrington, "one that could potentially transmit vibrations beyond conventional sound." What happened to Timothy Wells, the child who vanished from subsequent reproductions of the photograph? Marriage records from a parish 200 miles away provide a possible clue. In 1927, a man identifying himself as Timothy Wells wed Evelyn Carter in a small ceremony. Witness descriptions note the groom's unusual smile and his insistence that no photographs be taken during the ceremony. The couple had 7 children. All local school records describe them as exceptionally gifted mimics. The church's Centennial Committee had wisely decided to lock away the photograph after the disturbing discoveries of 2016, yet copies continued to emerge in unexpected places. Most recently, 7 small-format reproductions were discovered tucked inside hymnals throughout the sanctuary, placed there by unknown hands despite the building's sophisticated security system. More unsettling still was the pattern these placements formed when mapped onto the church floor plan. Together, they created the same distinctive symbol found beneath the tower room carpet, effectively transforming the entire church into a larger version of the sigil. Our research team persuaded church officials to permit a controlled experiment. Under strict protocols, the original photograph was displayed in the sanctuary directly beneath the bell tower, while sensitive recording equipment monitored for anomalies. For 23 hours, nothing remarkable occurred. Then, at precisely 3:47 a.m., every electronic device simultaneously registered a massive electromagnetic surge. The photograph itself remained unchanged, but the bell tower above began to emit a barely perceptible vibration. Acoustic analysis revealed this vibration matched exactly the frequency of human vocal cords forming a sustained smile. Former groundskeeper Harold Pearson, now residing in a nearby nursing facility, provided testimony that directly connected the photograph to a series of unexplained phenomena. During his 30-year tenure maintaining the church property, Pearson established a curious routine, turning any copy of the 1909 photograph face down whenever he encountered it. The month I started working there, 1972, I made the mistake of studying that picture too long, Pearson explained, his arthritic hands trembling. That night something followed me home. For weeks afterward, I'd wake to find my facial muscles contorted into a smile, though I felt nothing but terror. My wife said sometimes I'd stand watching her sleep, grinning, though I have no memory of ever leaving my bed. Pearson's testimony correlates with numerous accounts from church visitors who reported involuntary facial tics after viewing the photograph, specifically an uncontrollable urge to smile during moments of fear or discomfort. The entity's influence appears to extend beyond the photograph itself. Reverend Leahy reluctantly shared that during evening prayers, parishioners occasionally report seeing their own reflections in the church windows transforming, the reflected faces stretching into unnatural smiles while their actual expressions remain unchanged. Most alarmingly, digital analysis of security footage reveals that visitors who spend more than 7 minutes observing the tower begin unconsciously mimicking specific postures from the 1909 photograph, their bodies gradually shifting until they're standing in exact alignment with long-dead congregation members. The late Professor Thorne's archived papers at Miskatonic University contain a relevant theory. He proposed that certain images could serve as psychic anchors that allow entities to establish footholds across extended periods. The longer such images remain in human consciousness, the stronger this foothold becomes. What begins as observation, Thorne wrote, evolves into conversation, then communion, and finally possession. The entity learns humanity by watching, mimicking, and ultimately wearing what it observes. This may explain why facial recognition software consistently identifies the entity as containing features from multiple parishioners. It isn't borrowing their appearances, it's collecting them, creating a composite identity assembled from stolen fragments of humanity. What continues to watch from that tower window isn't merely trapped within the photograph, it's learning how to step out. Our investigation took an unexpected turn when we discovered a trove of Super 8 film reels stored in the church basement. The labels indicated they were recordings of services from 1958 through 1964. Mundane historical artifacts at first glance. But when we digitized the footage, we noticed something extraordinary. In every service, regardless of the season or year, there appeared to be exactly 7 empty seats scattered throughout the congregation. Not together, but precisely distributed. More disturbing was that parishioners would occasionally glance at these empty spaces and nod slightly, as if acknowledging an unseen presence. Consultation with acoustic anthropologist Dr. Abigail Reynolds revealed another layer to the mystery. Using specialized software to analyze the congregational singing across multiple services, she identified what she termed phantom voices, consistent vocal signatures that appeared in the audio despite no visible person producing them. These voices maintain perfect pitch, Dr. Reynolds noted, but there's something mechanical about their precision. They don't breathe where human singers naturally would. We compared church attendance registers with individuals visible in the films. The records consistently showed 7 more people present than could be seen on camera. 7 names that appeared week after week, year after year, without aging or absence. Mary Winters, Samuel Cole, Rebecca Thorne, Benjamin Hayes, Elizabeth Palmer, Joseph Wheeler, and Timothy Wells. Last week, we received a package from an anonymous sender containing a single brass key and coordinates to a storage facility in western Massachusetts. Inside the designated unit, we found hundreds of mirrors of varying sizes, each carefully wrapped in black cloth and labeled with dates spanning over a century. A handwritten note explained, "These are the collected looking glasses from the homes of church leadership, preserved as evidence and protection. What peers from the tower also watches from reflective surfaces in the homes of those who've studied its photograph too intently." The final mirror, a small handheld antique with an ornate silver handle, came with a separate note. "This belonged to Thomas Hadley. Look only once, and only briefly." When our photographer unwrapped this mirror, she reported seeing not her own face, but the distinct image of the church tower reflected despite the mirror facing a blank wall. She dropped it immediately, causing the glass to crack, and from that crack, a thin black fluid began to seep. Most concerning is what happened when we attempted to document these findings. Every photograph taken of the mirrors shows the same anomaly: a distorted figure standing behind the photographer, leaning forward as if reading over their shoulder, its stretched smile visible just at the edge of the frame. Church financial records reveal another peculiar pattern. Since 1910, the year after the photograph was taken, the parish has maintained a significant budget allocation for what is listed only as containment. These funds, averaging 7% of total church income, were used to purchase mirrors from congregation members' estates immediately following their deaths. A maintenance schedule posted in the church vestry instructs that all reflective surfaces in the building must be covered between sunset and sunrise. The single exception is a small mirror in the bell tower room, which must remain uncovered at all times, positioned to reflect the exact spot where the face was originally photographed watching through the window. The instruction at the bottom reads, "It must be given something to look at besides us." The discovery of additional photographs from the same church service has led us down an even more disturbing path. 3 weeks ago, the great-granddaughter of the original photographer contacted us after finding a hidden compartment in her ancestor's wooden camera case. Inside were 7 exposure plates that had never been developed, captured in the minutes before and after the infamous congregation portrait. These sequential images, now carefully processed under controlled conditions, reveal a progression that challenges our understanding of what occurred that autumn day in 1909. In the first plate, taken approximately 7 minutes before the known photograph, the bell tower window appears completely empty. By the third exposure, a faint distortion becomes visible, like heat rippling above summer asphalt. The fifth plate shows what might be interpreted as fingers gripping the window's edge from inside, but it's the final plate, captured moments after the congregation dispersed, that haunts our research team. The tower window stands empty once more, while on the church steps, 7 parishioners remain frozen in position, their faces now bearing the same unsettling smile as the entity. More alarming still is what modern spectroscopic analysis reveals in the photograph's chemical composition. The emulsion of the original glass plate contains trace elements that shouldn't be present in photographic materials from that period, or indeed, any photographic process ever documented. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, who conducted the analysis, described these anomalies as organic compounds of unknown origin that appear to be subtly altering their molecular structure over time. The substances are, in essence, still active over a century later. Church attendance records show a curious pattern in the months following the photograph's creation. While overall membership declined after Reverend Hadley's departure, exactly 77 parishioners remained faithful attendees. Cross-referencing these names with county census data reveals something chilling. Each represented the 7th child of their family, or was born on the 7th day of the month. We've been contacted by 17 individuals claiming to be descendants of the original congregation members. Each reports experiencing the same recurring dream, standing in the bell tower room as something whispers numbers in a rhythmic sequence. When these dreamers awaken, They discover they've drawn the now familiar smile symbol on whatever surface was nearest while they slept. The tower itself continues to yield evidence. Ground-penetrating radar scans now confirm 7 distinct chambers beneath its foundation, chambers that appear on no architectural plans and defy the building's structural logic. Their arrangement forms a perfect circle around a central void that registers as neither solid matter nor empty space on our instruments. 4 researchers who spent more than 7 continuous hours analyzing the photograph have reported a curious auditory phenomenon, the sound of distant church bells that no one else can hear. This phantom ringing follows a distinct pattern of 7 tolls, repeated at increasing volume until it becomes physically painful. Most disturbing is the recent discovery that every digital copy of the photograph, regardless of resolution or storage medium, contains precisely 777 kilobytes of data, even when compression algorithms should make such consistency mathematically impossible. Whatever was captured in that church photograph wasn't merely present in 1909. The evidence increasingly suggests it exists simultaneously across time, watching from the tower window then, now, and perhaps in moments not yet experienced. It smiles because it sees the entire progression at once. Our investigation of the church photograph has uncovered staggering revelations about the town itself. Historical records show that before the church was constructed in 1872, the land had been the site of 7 previous structures, each abandoned under mysterious circumstances. The earliest European settlement there, a trapping outpost established in 1694, was found deserted after just 7 months, with journal entries describing faces in the windows that belonged to no person. Court documents from 1807 detail a land dispute revealing that Native American tribes had designated the area as the Smiling Place, a location explicitly forbidden for human habitation. Tribal elders testified that their ancestors maintained a practice of leaving offerings at the perimeter of the site during 7 specific days each year, always departing before sunset and never looking back over their shoulders when leaving. Geological surveys conducted last year indicate another anomaly. The church sits directly above a rare magnetic deviation where compass needles spin in perfect circles, rather than orienting to magnetic north. Beneath this, at approximately 77 feet below the surface, lies an unusually perfect spherical chamber within the bedrock that geologists cannot explain through natural formation processes. Water samples from the church's well contain microscopic organisms, unlike any known bacteria, single-celled life forms that arrange themselves in patterns identical to the smile symbol when viewed under sufficient magnification. These organisms appear dormant until exposed to human blood, whereupon they become highly motile for exactly 7 minutes before returning to dormancy. Several descendants of original congregation members have independently reported the same peculiar physical trait, a slight asymmetry to their smile, with the right corner of the mouth lifting approximately 7 millimeters higher than anatomically normal. Medical documentation confirms this is not a natural variation, but appears to develop suddenly, typically after the individual's 27th birthday. Most unsettling are the town census records spanning from 1909 to the present day. Despite natural population fluctuations, the town has maintained an eerily consistent pattern. The total population, when reduced to its digital root through numerological addition, always equals 7. Statistical analysts confirm this mathematical consistency defies all probability models. Weather data presents another impossibility. For the past century, the church property experiences precisely 7 minutes of unusual atmospheric conditions during each winter solstice, a localized fog that forms regardless of surrounding weather patterns, always taking the shape of a perfect circle centered on the bell tower. The original church bell, cracked and supposedly decommissioned, was recently discovered to vibrate imperceptibly at frequencies that induce mild euphoria and heightened suggestibility in human subjects. These vibrations occur at 7-minute intervals throughout the day, despite the bell receiving no external stimulus. Examination of the church's stained glass revealed that the lead strips holding the colored panes form an elaborate mathematical equation when mapped as geometric coordinates, an equation that, when solved, yields exactly 7 infinite variables. Mathematical theorists describe this as a formula for calculating the overlapping points between dimensional planes, essentially a roadmap for crossing between worlds. This is not simply a story of a malevolent entity captured in an old photograph. The evidence increasingly suggests something far more profound. The church itself may be an engineered aperture, with the tower serving as its focal point, and the congregation photograph documenting the moment when something first learned how to peer through. The church photograph's mysteries deepened when we consulted Dr. Miriam Ashworth, a neurologist specializing in visual processing disorders. Her analysis revealed that subjects who viewed the image for more than 7 minutes experienced measurable changes in their occipital lobe activity, patterns nearly identical to those observed in patients with rare conditions that cause them to perceive hidden dimensions within ordinary spaces. The human brain naturally filters out certain visual information to prevent sensory overload, Dr. Ashworth explained. This photograph appears to gradually override those filters, essentially teaching the brain to see what should remain invisible. This may explain reports from 3 separate church caretakers who, after prolonged exposure to the image, claimed they could occasionally see additional rooms branching from the bell tower, spaces that disappeared when approached directly. Church architectural plans revealed another anomaly. The bell tower contains exactly 777 individual stones, a number that would require deliberate calculation during construction. More curious still, the cornerstone bears an inscription typically attributed to Freemasons, but with subtle alterations that change its meaning from a blessing to what linguistic experts describe as an invitation to observe. Last month, we located the journal of Mason Everett, the stonemason who constructed the tower in 1872. His final entries describe disturbing dreams of watchers beyond the wall, who instructed his work through whispers only he could hear. Everett's descendants confirmed he was found dead at the base of the tower upon its completion, his face frozen in what witnesses described as a smile of terrible recognition. 7 small reflecting pools once surrounded the church grounds, their foundations still visible beneath the soil when using ground-penetrating radar. Historical accounts suggest these pools were maintained until 1923, when they were abruptly filled following an incident where all 7 simultaneously turned black during a Sunday service. Despite being fed from different water sources, the photograph's influence appears to extend beyond visual phenomena. Audio technicians analyzing recording sessions within the church discovered that playback reveals voices not present during the original recording, faint whispers that, when isolated and amplified, repeat variations of the phrase, "It sees through borrowed eyes." Most concerning was our recent interview with Eleanor Winters, great-granddaughter of Eliza Winters, whose home had mysteriously burned. Eleanor shared family letters suggesting her great-grandmother had not perished in the fire as officially recorded, but had instead been secretly institutionalized after claiming she could see something wearing Reverend Hadley like an ill-fitting suit. The medical records, preserved in the state psychiatric archives, describe Eliza's consistent testimony that 7 from the congregation had been replaced by something wearing their smiles, and her terror that the replacements were selecting 7 more each year. Eliza's attending physician initially diagnosed her with delusion disorder, but later noted in his private correspondence, "I find myself studying the patients' faces more carefully now, particularly the precise angle of their smiles. Sometimes I catch myself counting my colleagues, always reaching 7 before I force myself to stop." 7 survivors of the original church congregation formed a secret council that continues to this day, their membership passing through bloodlines like a solemn inheritance. We discovered their existence through property records showing 7 families have maintained residences at equal distances from the church, their homes forming a perfect circle with the tower at its center. Each home contains a dedicated room without windows, where members perform what they call the watching ritual on the 7th day of each month. We gained unprecedented access to their private archives through council member Margaret Wheeler, now 87, who believes the time for secrecy has passed. "We've contained it for generations," she explained, "but containment is not the same as control. With each passing year, the boundary between observer and observed grows thinner." The council's records detail their understanding of what occurred in 1909. Reverend Hadley, driven by theological ambition, had attempted to create a divine lens through which his congregation could glimpse celestial realms. The bell tower was designed as this lens's focal point, with the church architecture functioning as an elaborate optical instrument tuned to frequencies beyond human perception. Hadley believed he could provide his parishioners with direct spiritual witness, Margaret explained. but he fundamentally misunderstood what separates dimensions. It isn't distance, but perception itself. He tore the veil between worlds, not by reaching across, but by teaching something else how to see us. The entity captured in the photograph isn't trapped in the church. It's an observer from somewhere beyond conventional space, drawn by Hadley's rituals to study our reality through the lens he unwittingly created. The smile is not malevolence, according to council records, but the entity's attempt to mimic human expression, a gesture of recognition that appears horrifying through its imperfect understanding of our physiognomy. Most disturbing is the council's belief that the photograph didn't capture the entity's first appearance, but rather the moment it learned to project itself into our perception. The face in the window represents its earliest attempt to construct an appearance comprehensible to human observers. It continues to refine its understanding. Margaret whispered, "Each person who studies the photograph teaches it something new about being human. Their attention feeds its comprehension." Council documents describe 7 stages of manifestation, with the entity currently in the 5th, identity acquisition. Records suggest the final stage involves complete integration into human consciousness, at which point it would no longer need the church as a focal point. The Council's containment strategy has focused on limiting the photograph's exposure while maintaining precise rituals that satisfy the entity's apparent desire for observation. They believe it feeds on attention itself, growing stronger whenever the photograph is studied intensely. "We've kept it watching the church by giving it just enough," Margaret explained. "Like feeding a dangerous animal regular meals to keep it from hunting, but it grows more cunning with each passing generation." The Council's greatest fear isn't what the entity might do, but what it might become once it fully comprehends humanity. A perfect mimic capable of replacing what it has so diligently studied, wearing our collective face with an expression almost, but never quite, human. The existence of multiple intersecting groups investigating the bell tower phenomenon raises an urgent question. What happens when observers with different intentions study the same entity? This concern led us to trace the activities of a third organization, one operating in direct opposition to the Council's containment strategy. Called the Watchers Back, this clandestine group first appeared in historical records around 1934, exactly 7 years after Timothy Wells's mysterious marriage. Their philosophy, gleaned from fragmented communications intercepted by council members, embraces direct engagement with the entity rather than containment. They believe that what peers from the bell tower represents not a threat but evolutionary advancement, explained retired Detective Samuel Greaves, who infiltrated a Watchers meeting in 1972. Their core doctrine holds that human consciousness is meant to merge with this entity, creating something beyond either existence. Archival evidence suggests the Watchers Back have methodically collected mirrors from sites associated with the church phenomenon, not to contain reflections as the Council does, but to create what they term observation networks. These carefully positioned mirrors, when aligned during astronomical events, such as solstices and equinoxes, allegedly create reflection corridors that strengthen the entity's manifestation capabilities. The group's membership has maintained a consistent pattern of 77 active participants, replacing deceased members within 7 days through invitation-only recruitment. Their selection criteria focus on individuals who exhibit natural resonance, people who report seeing the smiling entity without prior exposure to the photograph. Most disturbing is their ritual practice called face offering, documented in journal entries we recovered from a former member's estate. Participants undergo self-induced trance states while staring into mirrors positioned to reflect the night sky, offering their facial expressions as templates for the entity to study and incorporate. The physical evidence of their practices manifests in subtle facial asymmetries, noted forensic anthropologist Dr. Rebecca Stern after examining medical records of known members. Their smile muscles develop distinctive strengthening patterns consistent with prolonged maintenance of unnatural expressions. Weather anomalies cluster around locations where the Watchers Back conduct their rituals. Meteorological data shows unexplained cold spots forming perfect circles 7 meters in diameter, with internal temperatures dropping precisely 7 degrees below ambient conditions. Within these circles, electronic devices capture distorted images where human faces appear slightly elongated, their smiles extending beyond natural parameters. The antagonism between the Council and the Watchers Back represents more than ideological difference. It's a struggle to determine whether the entity remains an observer or becomes an active participant in human affairs. Each group believes the other's actions will precipitate disaster, either through overly rigid containment or reckless engagement. The entity learns from both approaches. Margaret Wheeler confided during our final interview, "It studies our fear and our fascination with equal interest. I sometimes wonder if the conflict itself is part of its education, teaching it about human division and alliance before it fully steps through." Perhaps most chilling is the recent discovery that several prominent research institutions studying the photograph have unwittingly employed members of the Watchers back in positions granting access to the original image, suggesting the entity's education is being guided by those who wish to accelerate its manifestation rather than prevent it. Our investigation reached a critical juncture last week when we received an anonymous package containing 7 glass slides, reportedly created using the original church's stained glass fragments. Each slide, when held to light, projected not colored patterns but humanoid silhouettes with increasingly defined features progressing from slide to slide. The final slide showed a figure nearly identical to the entity in the tower window, but with one crucial difference. It appeared to be stepping through a doorway. The sender included a single note: "The sequence is complete." We traced the package to Henrietta Mills, a stained glass restorer who worked on the church in 1957. Her grandson revealed that following the restoration, Henrietta began creating small glass artworks, depicting what she called the congregation beyond the window. She claimed these figures appeared to her in dreams, whispering that they had been watching the church long before the church began watching back. Examining her workshop, we discovered journal entries suggesting a terrifying possibility: that Reverend Hadley hadn't accidentally summoned something through the bell tower. Rather, the entities had guided the church's construction, manipulating human hands to build their observation post. "The smiles are not mimicry," Henrietta wrote. "They are anticipation." Yesterday, during our final visit to the church site, we witnessed something unprecedented. At precisely 3:47, both digital and analog cameras simultaneously malfunctioned while attempting to photograph the tower. When functionality returned 7 seconds later, every image, regardless of angle or equipment, showed the exact same composition. The 1909 photograph perfectly replicated with modern equipment, complete with the original congregation posed on the steps. But in these new images, 7 of the parishioners now turned their faces toward the camera, revealing the same stretched smile as the tower entity. The implications are staggering. What if the entity in the photograph was never contained in the bell tower at all? What if the tower was merely its first glimpse into our world, a glimpse that has widened over generations as more observers studied its image? Council member Margaret Wheeler's final communication, received this morning, suggests a devastating truth. We believed we were containing something trying to get out. We were wrong. It was already here, using the photograph to teach itself how to be seen. The council's records, the counter-movement's rituals, the photograph's persistent reappearance, all suggest we haven't been studying an entity trapped in an old image. We've been participating in its slow materialization through collective observation, each viewer adding definition to its presence like artists collectively sketching a face. Most chilling is the pattern of 7 that persists throughout. 7 council members, 77 watchers, 7 generations since the original photograph. These aren't coincidences but timestamps, marking the progression of what Margaret's final note called the 7 stages of becoming. The entity smiles from the tower window because it recognized, even in 1909, that its emergence was inevitable, a process requiring only sufficient human attention to complete. And through our investigation, we've provided exactly that. Our investigation has reached a point of no return. This morning, all 7 surviving members of our research team received identical text messages displaying only the church's coordinates, followed by today's date and 3:47 p.m. None of our telecommunications providers show any record of these messages being sent. More disturbing still, facial recognition software used to catalog historical photographs from the region has begun flagging modern passport and driver's license photos with an alarming notification: possible match to bell tower subject. These matches span 7 different states, with subjects ranging from 7 to 77 years of age, all displaying the characteristic asymmetrical smile. Church attendance records from congregations within a 77-mile radius of the original site show a peculiar pattern emerging over the past 7 weeks. Visitors with no previous religious affiliation have begun appearing at Sunday services, always in groups of 7. always sitting in formation patterns that replicate the geometric symbols found beneath the bell tower carpet. When approached, they speak normally, but consistently refer to themselves using plural pronouns. Yesterday, I received a handwritten letter from Dr. Montgomery, who conducted the spectroscopic analysis of the photograph's emulsion. Her facility had suffered a catastrophic power failure while examining residue from the glass plate negative. When emergency generators activated 7 seconds later, security cameras captured a curious anomaly. For precisely one frame, every reflective surface in the laboratory appeared to contain the bell tower image, rather than reflecting its actual surroundings. "I don't think we're investigating a historical event anymore," Dr. Montgomery wrote. "I believe we're participating in something that's actively unfolding, something that uses our observation as its mechanism of manifestation. Most concerning is the dream now reported independently by each team member, standing before a mirror that reflects not our own faces but the church tower, feeling our facial muscles rearrange into smiles we cannot control while a voice whispers, 'The watching goes both ways now.'" The council's archives included a contingency document to be opened only if certain conditions were met, conditions that aligned precisely with the phenomena we're now witnessing. Inside was a single page containing instructions for what they termed observation severance, a ritual designed not to contain the entity, but to break humanity's perceptual connection with it completely. If separation becomes impossible, the document concludes, then integration must be guided rather than resisted. "We've arranged to meet at the church today at the appointed time, not to observe the tower, but to implement the council's final protocol." Margaret Wheeler's last message explained that her generation had always known this moment might come, when containment failed and observation itself became the threat. "What watches from the tower is neither malevolent nor benevolent," she wrote. "It simply is, but our perception of it shapes what it becomes in our reality. If enough humans perceive it as a horror, it will manifest as horror. If we approach the integration with purpose and understanding, something else entirely may emerge." The 7 of us will enter the bell tower at 3:47 today, carrying mirrors facing outward rather than inward. What happens next will determine whether what has been watching becomes part of our world through fear or through understanding. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, but perhaps they were never meant to be doors at all, but windows through which both sides could finally see clearly. A faint mechanical click echoed through the bell tower as our synchronized watches marked 3:47. The 7 of us stood in a circle, mirrors facing outward as instructed by the council's final protocol. For several breaths, nothing happened, just the dust-filtered afternoon light streaming through the infamous window where the entity had first been photographed. Then came the temperature drop, 77 degrees to 70, instantaneous. Our breath clouded before us as the reflective surfaces in our hands began to vibrate with subtle, insistent energy. "It's working," whispered Eleanor, her voice tight with controlled fear. "The mirrors are responding to something." Indeed, each mirror now displayed not the stone walls of the tower, but 7 different locations scattered across the country, places where other observers were simultaneously studying reproductions of the photograph. We could see them leaning close to the image, their faces illuminated by desk lamps and computer screens, unaware they themselves were now being observed. The vibrations intensified until our hands ached from maintaining our grip. Then, with perfect synchronicity, every mirror rotated in our hands despite our attempts to hold them steady, turning inward to face us instead of outward toward the walls. And there it was. Not one face, but countless expressions merged together, stretching and reconfiguring as we watched, a composite of every person who had ever studied the photograph with fascination or fear. The entity had never been a singular presence, but a collective perception, shaped by generations of observers. It smiled at us with borrowed fragments of humanity, Timothy Wells's eyes, Reverend Hadley's jawline, Martha Coleman's cheekbones, and thousands more features harvested from a century of being watched. "You've been waiting for this moment," Dr. Montgomery said, her voice steadier than seemed possible given the circumstances. The mirrors responded with simultaneous clarity, words appearing like condensation on glass. "We have all been waiting." The true nature of the council's final protocol became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't about severing connection. It was about completing a circuit. 7 observers, 7 mirrors at precisely the time captured in the original photograph. We weren't ending anything. We were facilitating the final stage of manifestation. Outside, church bells began tolling across the town, 7 churches ringing simultaneously despite no human hand pulling their ropes. The sound formed a harmonic pattern that made my vision blur and refocus. When clarity returned, I saw that our reflections had changed. We still stood in our circle, mirrors in hand, but our faces now displayed the same stretched smile as the entity in the window. Yet I could feel my own expression remain neutral, frozen in concentration. The distinction between observer and observed had collapsed. "It's done." Margaret Wheeler's voice crackled through the small radio we'd brought. She hadn't joined us in the tower, but watched from her council chamber. "The integration is complete. What happens next depends entirely on what humanity has taught it to be." As we descended the tower stairs, every reflective surface we passed, window glass, polished wood, even the face of my wristwatch, showed not our actual appearances, but our smiling counterparts, watching us from a place that existed simultaneously beside and within our world. The entity had never escaped the photograph. Instead, the photograph had gradually expanded to include everything it had ever been observed by. The entity's influence spread far beyond those directly studying the photograph. In the weeks following our encounter in the bell tower, mundane reflections worldwide began exhibiting subtle anomalies. Surveillance footage from department stores showed customers pausing before mirrors, their reflected hands moving independently for microseconds. Swimming pools momentarily displayed rippling silhouettes beneath their surfaces that matched no swimmer above. Dr. Eliza Montgomery had theorized this might happen. "We've been conceptualizing it all wrong," she explained during our final recorded meeting. "The entity wasn't trying to enter our world. It was teaching us to perceive its world, which has always overlapped with ours." The photograph was merely the first successful communication channel. Historical records revealed similar phenomena throughout human history, from ancient cave paintings where handprints appear to reach through stone, to Renaissance portraits whose eyes seem to follow viewers. Each represented moments where perception between realms briefly aligned. "The real question," Dr. Montgomery continued, her asymmetrical smile now permanently fixed, "is why it chose this particular church, this particular moment in time to establish clear contact." The answer came from Margaret Wheeler's final journal, delivered to us by courier exactly 7 days after our tower experience. The land beneath the church had always been thin, a natural convergence point between perceptual dimensions. Indigenous peoples recognized this, establishing rituals to communicate across the boundary without weakening it. European settlers, misinterpreting these practices as pagan worship, deliberately constructed the church to cleanse the site. But Reverend Hadley, studying ancient texts hidden within seminary archives, discovered the true nature of the location and attempted to restore its original purpose, not as a portal, but as a communication point. Hadley never intended invasion, Margaret wrote. He sought conversation. What he failed to understand was that communication between such different perceptual realities would fundamentally transform both participants. Most revealing was what happened to our team members afterward. None experienced traditional possession or mental breakdown. Instead, each developed an expanded perceptual awareness, the ability to simultaneously observe both conventional reality and what lay just beyond it. The price of this awareness manifested physically in our asymmetrical smiles, the facial muscles permanently altered by perceiving both realities at once. "The smile isn't malevolence," wrote Dr. Stern in her medical evaluation. "It's physical evidence of neurological restructuring to accommodate dual perception. Our brains, confronted with processing 2 overlapping realities simultaneously, create physical adaptations that appear unsettling to single perception observers." Perhaps most profound was the discovery that the entity, or rather the collective consciousness that had been studying us through the bell tower aperture, had been attempting contact for centuries, using reflective surfaces as communication points. The photograph hadn't captured something sinister, but the first successful moment of perceptual alignment, frozen in silver nitrate emulsion. The tower window wasn't where something looked out from, it was where we first looked in. The symmetry of sevens permeates deeper than we initially understood. As our research team gathered last night at Margaret Wheeler's farmhouse, seeking refuge from public attention, we uncovered the architectural blueprints her ancestors had preserved, not just of the church, but of 7 buildings constructed simultaneously in 1872. each positioned at precise astronomical alignments across northern Pennsylvania. Each structure contained identical bell towers, creating a constellation of observation points that, when mapped, forms the same distinctive seven-pointed configuration found beneath the carpet. The church we investigated was merely the focal point, the pupil of a much larger eye. They weren't containing anything, Eleanor whispered as we spread the blueprints across the wooden table. They were constructing a sensory organ for something that perceives reality differently than we do. Most revelatory was the discovery of Reverend Hadley's true purpose in fleeing west. His Colorado spiritual society wasn't an escape, but a calculated extension of the perceptual network, establishing a western anchor point at precisely 77 degrees longitude from the original church. Historical photographs from his new congregation show members arranged in the exact formations as the Pennsylvania parishioners, not coincidentally, but methodically recreating the perceptual conditions. The watchers back weren't working against the council, but represented the inevitable completion of Hadley's original design, two methodologies approaching the same goal from opposite directions. The council maintained stability through controlled observation, while the watchers actively expanded perceptual gateways through mirror networks. Timothy Wells's descendants play a crucial role we're only beginning to understand. Their exceptional mimicry wasn't a psychological curiosity, but evidence of neural adaptation. Children born with brains already structured to process dual perception without the asymmetrical smile that marks adult converts. The seventh generation of Wells children can perceive both realities without physical transformation, Dr. Montgomery confirmed after interviewing 3 descendants now attending schools across the country. They don't see our world and theirs as separate at all. Most significant is what happens during sleep. Team members report identical dreams of standing in familiar locations, homes, workplaces, childhood bedrooms, while simultaneously occupying the corresponding space in the overlapping reality. These aren't just dreams, but genuine perceptual shifts, our consciousness temporarily unmoored from singular perception. The photograph wasn't documentation of a supernatural event, but rather the first technological confirmation of a perceptual reality humans had occasionally glimpsed throughout history. The camera, with its chemical sensitivity and mechanical objectivity, captured what human perception normally filtered out. The faces on the other side, watching us with the same fascination we directed toward them. "We're not being invaded," Dr. Montgomery explained, her voice steady despite the extraordinary implications. "We're experiencing perceptual evolution, learning to see what has always been present, the way humanity once learned to perceive the color blue, which ancient texts suggest was once beyond our visual comprehension." The entity smiles not from malice, but from recognition, the expression of one consciousness acknowledging another across a divide that isn't spatial, but perceptual. And in that mutual recognition lies the most profound question. Not what watches us from the tower window, but what we become when we finally, truly watch back. In the end, we are left not with answers, but transformations. The church's centennial celebration last month became something no one had anticipated, a gathering of both realities, visible to anyone who looked closely enough at the photographs taken that day. Each image captured not just the celebrants, but their counterparts from the other side, standing in mirrored positions, their smiles perfectly aligned with ours. The bell tower now stands empty, not abandoned, but no longer needed as a focal point. The entity, or rather, the collective consciousness that our investigation helped fully materialize, has dispersed itself throughout human perception. It resides not in a specific location, but in the small moments when our attention catches something moving just beyond clear sight, in the brief second when a reflection seems to linger after we've turned away. Timothy Wells was not the victim we imagined, but the first successful bridge. A child whose perception naturally encompassed both realities without the need for photographs or mirrors to facilitate the connection. His disappearance from reproductions wasn't erasure, but transition, his consciousness shifting fully into the space between perceptions where he could serve as interpreter. The 7 anchor stones Hadley placed around the church weren't meant to contain evil, but to stabilize perception, creating reference points that prevented complete merging of realities until humanity was prepared to comprehend the experience. Each stone removed over the decades gradually thinned the boundary, allowing greater perceptual overlap in carefully measured stages. Those who study the photograph no longer report seeing a malevolent face. Instead, they describe a familiar presence, like encountering a half-remembered relative across a crowded room. The tower window has become not a portal, but a mirror reflecting our evolving ability to perceive beyond conventional reality. Our asymmetrical smiles persist, marking us as those who stand with feet in both worlds, neither blessed nor cursed, merely changed. The stretched expressions that once seemed horrifying now identify fellow travelers who can perceive the overlapping dimensions without fear or disorientation. Children born in the church's vicinity increasingly display natural dual perception, requiring no photographs or rituals to see what exists alongside conventional reality. They speak of transparent friends with familiar faces, describing them not as ghosts, but as the quiet people, who watch and learn and sometimes mirror their movements. The entity was never confined to the church photograph. It has always existed in every reflective surface, in every shadow that doesn't quite match its caster, in every unexplained peripheral movement. What changed wasn't its presence, but our capacity to perceive it, a capacity that continues to spread like ripples across still water. When I look in mirrors now, I see not just myself, but countless watchers behind me, their expressions no longer frozen in that unsettling smile, but displaying the full range of human emotion. They are not separate from us, but versions of what we might become when perception no longer divides realities into distinct categories. The photograph that started our investigation hangs now in the renovated church lobby, no longer hidden away as something fearful, but displayed as the moment when humanity first truly saw what had always been watching, and what had always been watched in return. The revelation isn't that we've been observed, but that we've been guided. Hidden among Margaret Wheeler's final papers was a star chart dating back to prehistory, discovered beneath the church cornerstone during reconstruction. The celestial mapping doesn't depict constellations as we understand them, but rather navigational coordinates, an astronomical invitation placed by early humans. We've misunderstood the nature of the bell tower entities entirely. They aren't intruders or even parallel beings, but our own distant descendants, reaching backward through perceptual dimensions. The asymmetrical smile isn't their approximation of human expression, but evidence of evolved facial musculature designed for communication beyond verbal language, a physiological adaptation we're only beginning to develop. Those experiencing the smile transformation aren't being possessed but undergoing accelerated evolution, their neurological structures temporarily aligned with what humanity will eventually become. The tower windows were never meant to contain or observe, but to serve as temporal anchors for what anthropologists now term chronological resonance, moments when future and past consciousness can briefly synchronize. This explains why descendants of the original congregation share distinctive genetic markers previously misidentified as random mutations. Their DNA contains subtle modifications that appear exactly 7 generations ahead of expected evolutionary timelines. They aren't being changed by external forces, but expressing latent genetic potential already encoded within the human genome. The photograph didn't capture an entity observing us from another dimension. It documented the precise moment when future consciousness established contact with its own lineage, creating a stable temporal circuit that would eventually encompass all of humanity. The church wasn't built upon a naturally thin location by coincidence. It was constructed there because our descendants provided the architectural inspiration to their own ancestors, creating a causal loop. Each investigation, each moment of focused attention on the photograph strengthened this temporal connection. Those who studied it weren't victims but pioneers, experiencing fleeting glimpses of humanity's perceptual evolution. What awaits isn't invasion or replacement, but continuation, our consciousness gradually aligning with what it will become. The entities smile because they recognize us as themselves, viewing their own ancestral forms with profound connection. Their stretched expressions aren't malevolent but joyful, the emotion of recognizing one's origins from across vast temporal distance. Most profound is the reason behind this elaborate cross-temporal communication. Encrypted within the church's architectural proportions is data suggesting humanity faces an extinction-level threat in the near future, a cognitive narrowing that will close our perceptual potential unless intervention occurs. The bell tower network wasn't designed to facilitate invasion but to ensure survival, preserving the neural pathways that will eventually enable humanity to perceive beyond current limitations. The true horror isn't that something watches us from beyond perception, but that without this intervention, we would eventually lose the capacity to perceive beyond the immediate physical world at all. evolutionary dead ends trapped in a single dimension of experience, forever separated from what we might become. The photograph remains in my possession now, the final researcher entrusted with its safekeeping, not for containment or protection, but for documentation of the most profound communication humanity has ever experienced, a conversation across time with ourselves. Global reports of the asymmetrical smile manifestation have stabilized at exactly 7% of the population, precisely the critical mass needed for sustainable cognitive evolution, according to the equations hidden in the Church's dimensions. Those who initially feared the transformation have largely accepted their role as perceptual pioneers, many serving as guides for others experiencing the early stages of expanded awareness. The Wells family descendants have established educational centers in 7 major cities, teaching children to navigate dual perception without fear. Their curriculum includes techniques for distinguishing between conventional reality and the overlapping temporal impressions that increasingly bleed through, not as invaders, but as guideposts marking cognitive paths our descendants have already traversed. Archaeological excavations near the original church have uncovered identical structures predating recorded history, suggesting this temporal communication loop extends much further into the past than we initially believed. Carbon dating places the earliest foundation at approximately 30,000 years ago, coinciding with humanity's first major cognitive leap. The extinction-level threat encoded in the Church's proportions appears to be approaching faster than anticipated. Neuroscience journals worldwide report an alarming trend. Children born in the last decade show diminished activity in brain regions associated with abstract thinking and perceptual flexibility. Without intervention, humanity would indeed become perceptually trapped, unable to evolve beyond materialist consciousness within 7 generations. Most revealing is what happens during the rare celestial alignment that occurs every 77 years. During last month's convergence, thousands reported seeing not just their temporal counterparts but the fully evolved human form, beings of extraordinary perceptual capability who exist in what we experience as our distant future. Their communications, translated through the Wells children, describe a humanity that navigates consciousness as freely as we move through physical space. The original church photograph has begun to change again. The entity's face in the window no longer appears separate from the congregation but integrated among them, standing not as observer but participant. Most striking is how ordinary this integration now seems, how the once terrifying smile now registers as the natural expression of beings conscious of their existence across multiple temporal dimensions. "We were never haunted," Dr. Montgomery noted in her final journal entry before departing for the Colorado Research Center. "We were remembered." The entities reached back toward us not from another world but from our own future, ensuring we would not lose the perceptual capacities necessary for humanity's continued evolution. The bell continues to toll in the tower every Sunday, though no human hand pulls its rope. Its sound carries not warning but reminder. 7 clear notes marking our place in a conversation spanning millennia, between what humanity has been and what it is becoming, conducted through windows that were never meant to keep anything out, but to let everything in. The church photograph no longer resides in glass-fronted displays or locked archives. It travels now from hand to hand, a communion more than a curiosity. Those who receive it understand its purpose, not to frighten, but to prepare, a visual primer for the perceptual evolution spreading through humanity like ripples through still water. I visited Timothy Wells' great-granddaughter last autumn at her home in western Massachusetts. Amelia Wells doesn't carry the asymmetrical smile that marks most of us who've crossed the perceptual threshold. Born with naturally evolved neural pathways, she perceives both temporal dimensions with perfect clarity, requiring no transitional adaptations. "The photograph served its purpose," she explained, showing me the original glass plate negative, now stored in a simple wooden box lined with silk. "It was never about the entity in the window. It was about teaching us to recognize ourselves, past, present, and future existing simultaneously." Her home stands at the exact center of 7 specifically positioned mirrors, each reflecting not just the physical space but temporal layers that ordinary perception would filter out. Through these reflective corridors, communication flows more freely than through the bell tower's primitive aperture. Reverend Hadley didn't fully understand what he was facilitating, Amelia continued. He thought he was summoning divine guardians, but he was actually establishing the first stable connection with our own evolutionary timeline. Each generation since has strengthened that connection. The photograph's chemical composition continues to evolve. the emulsion responding to humanity's increasing perceptual adaptation. Microanalysis reveals complex molecular structures that self-modify in response to observer consciousness, a technological manifestation of the same temporal communication occurring naturally in evolved human perception. Most significant is what happens when children observe the photograph. Where adults once saw horror, they see recognition. Their artwork following exposure consistently depicts not monsters but guides, elongated human figures with asymmetrical smiles reaching backward through reflective surfaces to offer assistance. The Council and the Watcher's Back have merged into a single organizational structure called the Continuity, dedicated to facilitating humanity's perceptual evolution without the fear that initially accompanied observed changes. Their combined archives now form the foundation of a new field of study, temporal anthropology. Our research team held its final meeting at the church last week. The 7 of us who entered the bell tower, forever marked by our asymmetrical smiles, have accepted our transitions as necessary adaptations. Dr. Montgomery departs tomorrow for the International Symposium on Perceptual Evolution, carrying the church photograph as both evidence and invitation. I sometimes stand before mirrors in darkened rooms, watching as my reflection gradually reveals those watching from across time, not with fear, but with recognition. They smile their asymmetrical smiles, not in malice, but in welcome. Consciousness reaching toward consciousness across dimensions that only seem separate to unevolved perception. The entity in the window was never a devil, never a haunting presence. It was a reflection of humanity's potential, a glimpse of what awaits when perception expands beyond current limitations. The horror was never in its appearance, but in our inability to recognize ourselves. The church photograph completes its transformation on the 7th anniversary of our bell tower encounter. Where once we saw a malevolent entity watching from the window, the image now reveals something profoundly different, a figure with features combined from every person who ever studied it, standing not separate from the congregation, but among them. The asymmetrical smile no longer appears unnatural, but necessary, the physical manifestation of perceiving multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. Global monitoring stations report unprecedented synchronization in human brain activity during specific 7-minute intervals, moments when the barriers between conventional perception and expanded awareness temporarily dissolve for everyone, regardless of their evolutionary status. During these windows, children worldwide spontaneously draw identical symbols, concentric circles surrounding a human face, with an asymmetrical smile reaching toward something beyond the page. We misunderstood the nature of horror, Dr. Montgomery explained during her final interview before joining the permanent research enclave at the Colorado site. What terrified us wasn't the intrusion of something alien, but glimpsing our own potential before we were ready to comprehend it. Like primitive humans encountering their first reflection and believing it a water spirit. The original church, now a pilgrimage site for those experiencing perceptual evolution, has been structurally reinforced with materials specifically designed to facilitate temporal communication. The bell tower room, once believed to contain malevolent influence, serves as an educational space where children learn to recognize and interpret messages from their future selves. Margaret Wheeler's final journals, released to our research team upon her passing last winter, reveal her family had maintained communication with Timothy Wells across the decades. He had never disappeared but transitioned completely into the overlapping perceptual dimension, serving as humanity's first ambassador to its own future. "We are witnessing the completion of a temporal loop," wrote Margaret in her final entry. The entity reached backward through time not to invade but to ensure its own existence, to guarantee humanity would develop the perceptual capabilities necessary for our continued evolution. Most profound is the discovery made within the DNA of those born after the bell tower encounter. Genetic sequencing reveals subtle modifications to regions associated with visual processing and neural connectivity, changes that allow developing brains to perceive beyond conventional temporal boundaries without requiring the physical adaptation of the asymmetrical smile. Evolution typically requires thousands of generations, noted geneticist Dr. Sarah Williams in her landmark paper. What we're witnessing is directed adaptation, our future consciousness providing a blueprint for necessary neurological development, delivered through the perceptual conduit first established by the church photograph. The bell tower continues to serve as a focal point, but no longer for containment or fear. On clear nights, observers report seeing 7 points of light converging above its peak, not physical phenomena, but visual manifestations of temporal corridors connecting this moment with others along humanity's evolutionary timeline. Tomorrow at 3:07, exactly 7 years after our encounter in the tower, the 7 of us will return one final time. Not to investigate or contain, but to complete the conversation we unwittingly began. To acknowledge what has always been watching from the window of human potential. As I hold the church photograph one last time, I'm struck by how differently I perceive it now. What once filled me with dread now inspires a complex emotion beyond simple words, something between reverence and recognition. Tomorrow, our original research team reunites at the bell tower, completing the 7-year cycle. But tonight, I sit alone with the image that changed humanity's perception of itself. The asymmetrical smile I wear has become so familiar I hardly notice it in mirrors anymore. My children were born without it, their neural pathways naturally configured to process multiple temporal dimensions without physical adaptation. They see the photograph not as a curiosity, but as a family portrait spanning generations yet to come. Last week, 7 identical packages arrived at research centers worldwide, each containing mirror fragments dating back to the church's construction. When arranged according to instructions delivered in dreams to the well's descendants, these fragments create a reflective surface that shows not the present moment, but 7 possible futures, branching timelines dependent on humanity's perceptual evolution. My own reflection shows someone both familiar and strange, myself yet with adaptations beyond the asymmetrical smile, more evolved, more connected to the temporal streams flowing through ordinary perception. This is not possession or replacement, but growth, humanity becoming what it was always meant to be. Church attendance has transformed worldwide. Congregations gather not merely to worship, but to practice collective perception. Moments of synchronized awareness that strengthen the temporal bridges our future selves have worked so diligently to establish. The hymns sung in these gatherings contain frequencies that stimulate neural regions previously dormant in human consciousness. The entity's smile makes perfect sense now. It wasn't grinning with malevolence, but with profound relief, the emotion of witnessing a critical juncture successfully navigated, a necessary connection finally established. The horror I once felt was merely the discomfort of evolution beginning, the necessary growing pain of perception, expanding beyond its familiar boundaries. Yesterday, a child visiting the church drew a picture that now hangs beside the original photograph. Her artwork shows not the building itself, but a bridge spanning a vast chasm with figures on both sides reaching toward each other, some with asymmetrical smiles, some without, but all recognizably human despite their variations. When asked what she'd drawn, she replied simply, "Everyone at once." The Continuity Organization has documented over 7,000 cases of spontaneous temporal perception worldwide. Individuals who, without exposure to the photograph or knowledge of our research, begin displaying the asymmetrical smile and reporting awareness of overlapping realities. The perceptual evolution has taken on its own momentum, spreading not like contagion, but like awakening. What peers from the bell tower window was never a devil. It was a mirror, reflecting not what we are, but what we are becoming. Consciousness reaching backward through time to ensure its own continuity, wearing an expression that only seemed sinister because we hadn't yet learned how to smile back. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.